yourself and who you are and what you do.
So I'm a professor of childhood education and literacy development at NYU in New York. And before that, I've been here about 10 years and I've taught both undergraduate and graduate education. And before that, I was a professor at University of Michigan for 14 years. And then during that, I was Assistant Secretary for Elementary and Secondary Education under George W. Bush, in charge of No Child Left Behind. And then before that, I was a professor at Temple University. So that's just a little bit about me in terms of what I do.
And then what brought you to NYU?
What brought me to NYU, I was very happy at the University of Michigan, which is a wonderful school of education, but I yearned to be in urban settings and to work with students who have reading difficulties and reading needs. And I could imagine, with no disrespect to all of you, I could imagine no other city as wonderful as New York to begin to really understand urban education, because New York is the largest school district in the entire country. And so I felt like if we could begin to do something there, we could begin to do something anywhere. So what attracted me was the diversity. I like being around people of diverse cultures and ethnicities, and I felt it really provided that opportunity for me.
Okay, next we have a funny question. If you were an ice cream flavor, what would you be and why?
If I was an ice cream flavor,
Yes.
oh, passion fruit.
Oh,
That's
good.
that.
So I'm very passionate about education. So
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
What inspired you to promote literacy?
What inspired me was, I think it's an impediment for so many kids. So very early in my career, I went into a classroom and I saw these beautiful children who were so incredibly smart. You could just see it. You could see it in their eyes and the way they were responding to things. But they had no words to be able to describe how they were feeling and what they were experiencing. And I realized that it was the lack of language for these kids that really curtailed so many of the opportunities for them. And so I thought, this is the road to knowledge. If you can't read, think about how difficult your life must be. I mean, you can't get a driver's license. You don't know how to take medicine. You rely on other people instead of being able to read something on your own. You become very dependent in society if you can't read and read really well. And so that's really what began to drive me in terms of literacy and recognizing that so many children could have so many more opportunities if they only could read better.
What experience promoting literacy has most affected you and why?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I'll tell you what happened to me. I was at Temple University. It was one of my first jobs in an urban setting. And I asked parents to walk with me to the nearest school. And if you know Philadelphia, which is a smaller city than New York, everybody walks everywhere. So we would walk to the school, and as we walked, the children would have to step on tremendous amounts of garbage. We passed places where there were names on, graffiti and names on buildings, but the names on the building were people who died from drug overdoses. There was no playgrounds. There was no anything for these children to play with. And I remember saying to myself, what does this do to a child and their sense of hope and their sense of being able to be successful in school? What does that do to their aspirations? And through that, I realized that the immediate environment has tremendous effects on what you do. So even now, when I am home in New York and I'm walking home from NYU, I'll pass restaurants and I'll realize that, gosh, I wasn't hungry until I saw this restaurant, and now I realize I'm hungry. So the environment has an enormous press on everything you and I might do. And so what I began to do was say, how could we begin to change the environment for children so that we could have a more positive environment for them to learn. And so that's when we began to change the environment in classrooms. And what we did is we took books and we created areas within a classroom where the children would literally have to bump into a book in order to pass by. And we found that when they had to pass by those books, you know what they did? They picked them up and they started reading. And so we began to understand that, hey, if we change that environment, then the likelihood that they would do something that they were just not necessarily thinking about before, they would do. So that's when we became very, very interested in the environment and changing the environment so that children could really have greater opportunity to have books, greater opportunity to read.
Let's see. What was it like serving as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education in the U.S. Department of Education?
Well, that's a great question. It was very hard. So what I realized is that you can be a teacher. I've been a teacher, and you can be an academic. I've been a professor for many years. But when you go into the federal government, and in my role as assistant secretary, you now have a boss. In my world, I don't have a boss. I can do what I think is the right thing, just like a teacher. A teacher doesn't really have a boss. Maybe they have a principal, but I don't think of them as a boss. But when you go into the federal government, you have a boss. And my boss was George W. Bush. He was the president. And as a result, what you have to do is you have to align everything you say with what he believes. And that can be very hard for someone who's had a good deal of free speech. So for example, if I feel that children do not have resources and that we should be buying more books for children, I can't necessarily say that if my boss doesn't believe in it. I can't. So I have to keep my mouth shut. I have to not say the things I often believe in. So in federal government, you have to be loyal. And the key thing of being loyal sometimes can be very hard for an academic when you have your own beliefs and strategies. So that's the negative. The positive is that I felt that I could really do a lot. So for example, we started a program called Early Reading First, where we put $4 million in every early childhood setting for high poverty kids for a small period of time. And we could put books, and we could train teachers, and we could do a good deal to really improve children's achievement. Now the negative. The minute the administration changes, they get rid of the money. So you're often in the situation where you're making changes, and then the next administration can easily get rid of those changes. And so those are some of the challenges you have in going to the federal government.
Adding on to that, in your role and as your roles have progressed, what have you found to be the most effective way to promote literacy?
The most successful way to promote literacy?
Most effective and most successful way to promote literacy.
I just wrote an article last year that focused on small wins, WINS. And what I think is, and Ryland, this is why I love what you do. I think that it's the most effective strategy or small strategies to affect local government, local communities and neighborhoods. And so more and more of my work has really focused on the neighborhood, understanding and working within neighborhoods to make fundamental change for people in that neighborhood. So I think that while these federal laws can be very all-encompassing, they don't necessarily make the fundamental change that occurs within neighborhood. And I have come to think that the work that we're doing, whether it's in laundromats or playgrounds, or we're in barbershops this year, where else are we? Nail salons, that when and what we're doing is something very simple. We're putting books, and we're training barbers, and we're training grocery workers on how to interact with children over literacy development. That those small efforts might be the biggest bang for the buck in the long run. And I'm very hopeful that some of the kinds of work that you're doing, getting kids to get really involved in their local community, is the way to go.
Thank you very much. And tying into that question as well, what advice would you give to young people who want to make an impact in literacy and education moving forward, and even as most of us go off to college as well?
Right. I think that you're on the right track. And what I mean by that is, I'm part of a number of networks that focus on mother and child interaction and helping parents become more literacy partners. I think that's very helpful. But at the same time, I think that what happens is change is made on a community basis and on a neighborhood basis. And so therefore, what I would say to all of you is to get involved in your neighborhood, get involved in the places in which you work. So one of the things I do, for example, even with my undergraduates at NYU, is they're going to go and be a teacher in a school. But what I have them do is I have them walk the neighborhood where their children are likely to go. And I want them to become familiar with the local shopkeeper and the local parents, and where people get their food and where people go banking and day-to-day activity, because I think that's where they're going to be able to make change. I think it's not necessarily in the classroom. I think it might be out of the classroom. And that sounds kind of funny for someone who teaches teachers, but that's my belief.
No, that's extremely interesting. And I really like the idea and the process of doing the undergraduates and having them walk the campus.
You have written over 100 articles addressing literacy. What is the writing process like for you?
Oh, it's so hard. The writing process is always very, very hard and challenging. It is both, it's something that Csikszentmihalyi once said. He talks about flow and the notion of flow. So what happens when I start writing is I have a panic attack and I look at a blank screen and I say, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to begin. I'll never be able to do this. And then what I start doing is I start reading, and I read some of my colleagues' work, and those words begin to get in my brain, and I start having some ideas, and then I start playing with writing, and it takes days and days and days before I can frame my thoughts into what I think is a coherent argument. Oh, it's so hard. And then when I'm just at the brink, I'm so frustrated with myself, I'll feel like I'll go for a walk or something. I have a great dog, and the dog and I will go for a walk, and I'll say, aha, I think I've gotten it. I come back and I'll keep trying at it. And eventually I feel, oh my goodness, it's starting to cook. And then when that moment happens, it's starting to cook, I get this sense of flow. And what Csikszentmihalyi called it is achievement against resistance. So achievement, finally achieving something after it's been so hard, is so pleasurable. I can't tell you. And that's why I write.
Yeah, I think a lot more goes into writing than people think. So that's really encouraging to hear. So that if any of us ever are struggling, we just know that it's part of the process. And
it's part of the process. We'll right.
Get to the achievement part and it'll be fine.
Right.
What was it like helping to spearhead the No Child Left Behind Act?
Well, it was very hard. I can tell you a couple of stories. When the No Child Left Behind law was passed, I was very, very excited because I thought we were going to make fundamental change in education. I thought we were going to change how achievement was only for the rich and not for the poor in this country. I thought we were going to finally pay attention to those poor kids and make fundamental change so that they could achieve. So the day that No Child Left Behind passed, I cried my eyes out. I thought it was going to be one of the most exciting moments in my life. And then we started working on No Child Left Behind because a bill is only sort of like a framework. What happens is you now have to put words in that framework so that it actually is an enactment of the law. And when we started doing the enactment of the law, the implementation of the law, we realized it wasn't working. That if we weren't careful, every single school in the United States would be regarded as a failure. Every single school. 30,000 schools in the first year, it just went up and up and up. And I went and tried to suggest to the president, the domestic advisor, that this was the case, that we needed to change the law. They said that the law couldn't be changed because it would make us look weak. And here we just passed this wonderful law and it would make us look too weak. And so we didn't pass it and we didn't change it. And so sure enough, every single year, more and more schools were considered failures. And as a result, after a while, there was a revolt against the No Child Left Behind law. And you might know that it's regarded as a very, very poor opportunity to advance the needs of poor children after all. What was regarded as a good thing to begin with ended up having terrible negative consequences, with schools being closed for being considered failures. And as a result, it was very discouraging to work on something that you kind of knew ahead of time was not going to work, but there wasn't the will to change the law at the very beginning to enable kids to be more successful. So that's a long story to tell you about No Child Left Behind, but it's actually a whole course I teach. So
Wow.
much detail.
It's an important story, though, I think.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Very important story that needs to be told.
Yeah. That best of intentions don't always end up in the results expected.
That's right. That's exactly right.
What inspired you to create the World of Words in the NYU Literacy, Technology, and Culture Lab?
Oh, that was a wonderful opportunity. Actually, we got a grant in 2007, part of the Ready to Learn initiative in the US government. And we got a $5 million grant to say, what could we do to really change children's language and word learning opportunities? And so what we did is we worked with Sesame Street originally, and then we worked with other PBS Between the Lions to create a World of Words, which was designed to be both a multimedia intervention or vocabulary intervention. Since that time, the program has been all over Michigan, and it's been adopted in Washington, Hawaii, and every single year it has shown to have tremendous effects on children's vocabulary, concepts, and comprehension development. So the work was inspired by the fact that no one was dealing with very, very young children and helping them learn language very early on. And this was really sort of a unique opportunity that was both fun and effective.
Interesting. Adding on to World of Words, did NYU Literacy, Technology, and Culture Lab kind of follow the same progression as well, and building that as well? Was that under the $5 million grant too?
That was an additional series of millions, and that was designed, and it was very interesting. When we moved from Michigan to New York, they wanted to scale up. It was a scaled up intervention. So now the kids have it in, more than 1,000 kids have it in New York City in particular. And so we adapted it to ensure that more teachers could have it. So it's been an adaptation of that original program and not the same exact program.
Okay, we have a few fun questions to kind of end off our time.
Sure.
Know that you have a pet dog. What's the dog's name and what kind of dog is it?
Oh, he's a Weimaraner. Max is he's known as Mr. Max, and he's a beautiful Weimaraner, which you might know from William Wegman and all of his wonderful illustrations. I mean, photographs of Weimaraners. He's also the Sesame Street dog. If you've ever seen how they make numbers on Sesame Street, sometimes they use Weimaraners. So I could bring him out in a moment. He's very sweet.
That would be great.
Do you have a favorite place in New York City? And if so, where is it?
Well, I have to say my favorite place in New York City is West Village. It's the Greenwich Village of New York. And it's wonderful because it's more diverse than any other place in the world. It has a sense of great neighborhood, of intimacy, of beautiful old townhouses. And every morning I take Mr. Max to Washington Square Park where he runs and plays with other dogs. And I guess that's the moment I love the most. Oh, here he is. Max. Let me just see if I can. There. Max.
It's shy.
Max doesn't want to be on camera.
He's a little camera shy.
He's a little camera shy. Let's see.
Oh.
He's beautiful.
He's so pretty.
Yes. Yes.
He's really.
Well, it was wonderful talking to all of you guys.
Too. Thank you.
Thank you.